Hi, my name is James Hughes, and I would like to welcome you to the Replace Rogue Revit Lines Text and Dimensions presentation. ATG is a platinum level Autodesk software provider, and a platinum partner is someone who has the best customer service, best technical support, and best customer retention across authorized resellers. And I'd like to tell you just a little bit about myself. I've got 13 years of architectural experience. I'm a licensed architect in the state of Arkansas. And for the past 6 years, I've been an AEC industry specialist with ATG. So my full-time job is helping architects, also interior designers in construction, general contractors, helping engineers with Autodesk software, as well as several other technical services. One of the services that I specialize in is reviewing and fixing Revit templates. And for the most part, production Revit templates are a mess. And they have a convincing title block and a few tailored elements like, spiffy new elevation markers. But most firms have years of built up crud in their templates. Opening the type selector in a Revit project and seeing dozens of non-standard choices for lines and text or dimensions is very frustrating. And it makes selecting if you're a user, it makes selecting the correct type difficult. And it also empowers users to flaunt standards. And so finding and correcting those rogue types can be quite difficult and time consuming. One of the great benefits that templates are supposed to bring to a team of designers is a common core and standardization around I guess one way to say it would be the voice of the project or your standards. And today we'll talk about how to swap out rogue line types, text, and dimensions for the correct types, and then finally purge out those old rogue types. Our agenda today is to cover these learning objectives. We're going to access Type Swapper and its interface. We're going to explore problem scenarios. And we're going to repair models interactively. I'm probably going to spend more time showing you what you can do with out-of-the-box Revit, more so than spending time on the interface of the tool of Type Swapper. I'm going to show you how you can do this with out-of-the-box Revit. Then I'm going to do most of this work with a third-party tool. At the end, I'll point you how you can get a free trial of CTC Software's BIM Manager Suite, which is the suite that has this tool inside of it. Hunting down rogue type definitions can be very challenging if just one of that type exists somewhere inside of the project or inside of the template, tucked away, maybe in a drafting detail view, a legend, or in my experience, even more deviously in one random schedule subtitle. You might have a use of that text style. Wow, that's a messy room. I haven't looked at it in a couple of days there. Now I'm going to demonstrate the problem and how we can solve some of the problem with out-of-the-box Revit, and then how we can use a tool called Type Swapper to solve the remainder of the problem. So I'm going to swap over to Revit now, which I have already closed. Give me just a second here. BIMbox to the rescue. Get a quick start up here. All right, and I'm just opening up a standard training file that we utilize whenever we're doing like a fundamentals training. So it might actually be familiar to some of you guys, the modern hotel here. And it's in a pretty decent state as far as model tidiness goes. But what I've also done is taken a recent template that I reviewed, and I have brought over a lot of the line text and dimension styles from it, and many of those needed to be purged. And so that's going to kind of roughly show you guys the average number that firms are wrestling with. So if you've got fewer styles in play than this, then I guess you're relatively cleaner than some that we work on. So out of the box, if I wanted to get rid of some of the line types or text types or dimension styles, one of the places, well, let me start with a bad place to go. One place that I could go is down to the bottom of my project browser And then under annotations, I've got access to different families, but here I don't have access to line or text, but I could get rid of other families that I'm not wanting to utilize inside of the project. What's bad with doing model cleanup from this part of the project browser, and when I'm doing fundamentals training, I tell people, look, stay out of the families folder at least for a year as you're getting used to Revit, is if I choose any of the items that I see, oh, we don't actually want that in the project. If I right click on it and delete this, yes, it does get rid of that family, but it also ceases to exist. So it removes the whatever elevator is there. And so I've got to go find what might have been there to get rid of it. It's also possible there could be 0 uses here in the project, but normally you end up here because you tried doing purge unused, and that means that there is at least one in use. So the second place that we could go to kind of clean things out of the model is more robust, but underneath manage, we could choose, and let me pause here before I click this and say, if you're new to Revit, don't go here. If you consider yourself an intermediate or advanced user, then go ahead and click on this button. And then just like that, Revit slid a loaded gun across the table to me. And the very first thing that we want to do is put the safety on the gun. So we're going to check this box, which says check none. Until I do that, 595 elements are on the chopping block. And if I were to simply hit OK, Revit would very quickly get rid of a lot of items that I might actually need to use that may be, placed in the template, and I could purge them out. Now I could get them back, but it is an incredible amount of work, and there's a very good chance that I'll end up bringing over duplicate items that will iterate and kind of number it. It might bring over baluster, the same one that I was using, but then it will have to call it baluster 1 if I sort of grab and paste that in from some other container project. But from here, if I scroll down to the bottom, I do have the ability to purge out any text styles that are not in use. And that is a key phrase there at the end. If one example of that text exists anywhere in the project, I can't get rid of it, not from here. I would actually have to hunt down whatever random drafting detail that text occurs in and delete it from there, with really no way to point out where that is either. I can also trim out some dimension styles. Let's see. Yeah, so we got linear dimension styles. There's only one that's not in use. My suspicion is that we've got more than that, but I can only get rid of one of them if I wanted to, which is an arc length version of it. I can't get rid of line types or line styles rather from here. So that's one other thing to point out. So I've got pretty limited capabilities here. I can get rid of 2 of the 3, but I can only get rid of things that aren't in use. And this leads to a really junky problem that I run into, which is old template or current templates tend to have evolved from very old templates, and they carry all of that old baggage with them because most firms don't do what they should, which is a complete rebuild of their template every few years, which is what I advise. If you're there's a cost with rebuilding a template from scratch. I think you're in for a minimum of 12 hours. If you've got a lot of details and a lot of attention needs to be paid to it, it can be north of that for time that you need to set aside to do that. But basically what I recommend to firms is that every 3 years you do a complete rebuild. But in those years in between, you can use something like the tool I'm going to show you, Type Swapper, to be able to clean out things that may have found their way into the template. So let's close purge unused, because I really can only get rid of a couple of styles from there. So let me introduce you to the tool that I'm going to be kind of showing you or using to solve this problem. If I go to CTC Software tab, after you've installed any of the CTC software suites, it's going to create this tab, and it's going to populate in whatever tools that you have. We're going to be talking about one that's in the BIM Manager suite, which is this blue set of tools here. The light blue tools are tools that are free to use. The dark blue tools are free to use for 14 days. So you can do this as a trial. And if you have a junky template, might I recommend that you download this thing as a trial, and within those 14 days, clean up your template, get that maximum value out of out of a free trial. All right, I'm going to put this back. And I'm going to launch Type Swapper. Even if I'm not going to clean a template, if I'm just assessing it, or if I want to use Type Swapper to assess a project, it brings some great value to me as a BIM manager, which I'm doing part-time as well for hire for companies. So each of these tabs up here shows you a powerful thing that Type Swapper is able to do as far as deleting things, finding them, quantifying them, and very powerfully swapping them out, thus the name Type Swapper. This particular project has a bunch of duplicate families. Now, this happens whenever you've got two families that are basically the same, and this happens frequently whenever you copy and paste over a system family from a container project or previous job. So if I, found some stairs that I really needed and I pasted them into the project, there's a very good chance I would end up with baluster-round is already in use. And so it iterated on that and created baluster-round 1. And so this allows me to swap them out, and there's an option down here to delete them. And if you're new to Type Swapper and you don't quite trust it yet, you might uncheck that and then go double check those families and make sure that they're not actually doing something unique from that and someone just terribly named it. But if you trust Type Swapper to do that work, then it basically looks at the number iteration and then figures out which one is the original. It's guessing here. It said, well, how about the one that doesn't have the integer on the end? And so if that needed to change to something else, you could, choose from what's available there. So this one has already identified all of these, and I can have it swap them and delete them. And when it swaps them, it's actually going to try to rebuild the type parameters of the one that it's taking over. So it's not just going to introduce it to, differently set up as far as type parameters go, version of it. So let's see here. We'll hit swap. Are you sure? Yes. All right. We had some errors, and then we had, several successes here as well. Let's see if any of these errors are pertinent. Okay. It's just telling me how many instances were found. All right. So these still remain in here. We weren't successfully able to remove those, but we got some of them out of there. The other tools, I haven't run into those kind of errors except with the materials tab. So let me move on, because really this is about your primary functions that you're going to leverage quite a bit, which is going to be dimension styles. Boy, look at that. There's a lot here, a lot of text. Now, when I did purge unused, you didn't see near this many showing up, right? Because if you look over here, this is actually giving a count of how many are there. And what I love to do is hit this sort by number. One more time, descending. Here we go. And you can actually determine what is supposed to be the standard for a company based upon the numeration of how many of them there are. And so we can see that, this company evidently settled on 3/32 inch as their standard text. And normally, in my experience, firms choose either 3/32 or 1/8 inch, and they prefer to completely purge out and get rid of the other one, because 1/8 inch is 4/32 inch tall, is barely taller. And so you could actually have the two pieces of text side by side. The person that authored it never realized it. And it's not until you print it out and someone with a trained eye looks at it and they're like, I think this text is the wrong size. So to prevent this, we don't just want to delete it. Now we could, but that text would cease to exist and we would lose the text. So instead, what we want to do is swap out anything that actually has a count. So we're going to change this to our standard. And what I like to do is actually check the box or the boxes next to the ones that are the standard, so I don't get confused if this thing gets resorted or something like that. So I might take a minute and kind of figure out which ones we're supposed to be keeping. And then later, whenever I find one that's kind of a different answer for, sizing or whatever, I can still check and see what the equivalent approved version is. So here we're going to choose to change sorry, not going to change our 3/32 inch out. We're going to change our 1/8 inch out to 3/32 inch. Linear 3/32 inch aerial. Expand this out just a little bit more. Text above. See, some of these might be an old standard, you know, if you used to kind of split these out separately. And so that's a great way to take an old template and push some of your older definitions or, you know, places that used to exist into the current standard one. I won't go all the way down the list here, but all of these that have a one here, you would want to meticulously change these out. So let me run swap, and it's going to take this one that has 200 versions and 111 versions of this dimension. This is an incredible amount of detail views that have been probably meticulously brought over from AutoCAD, but it was done so long ago that it's using an older style. So we can run swap. Even though I didn't know where they were, Revit is going to be able to successfully swap out. What's my total count? 311 of those in about a quarter of a second. So that's pretty slick. Then any of these that have zeros and they are not approved standards, you know, we would be able to expand each of those boxes and purge unused, but here it's going to be a little bit easier if we just hit this delete key right here. And we're not in danger of deleting something that's actually in use. Got a fill pattern associated with that. That's interesting. Let me try just a few. There we go. I'm not sure which of these is tripping it up here, but you can process of elimination, then find out if there's something else that's going on with one of these, see if there's another way to kind of solve that problem. All right, so we can get a total count of how many are in use. We can identify which ones are our standard ones, and then we can perform the swap features here. And then finally, we can delete them out. Really powerful. It gets more powerful when you talk about text and line styles. These are the ones that are the greatest source of problem inside of a project. One thing that I do want to mention, well, we'll get to line styles in a minute. Newer Revit, you've got greater capabilities of controlling whether it's bold, underline, or italicized. You know, older Revit, you would have to create a separate style for that, but now you can click inside of it, highlight part of it, make that part bold. And so we don't need all of these older definitions for bold variants and, you know, some of these others that might need to disappear. In fact, that one has a count of 0. So let me sort these again. And again, we can tell 1/8 inch. In the other standard was the size that was gone with. That's interesting. I should have coordinated that with the dimension styles as I was kind of making an assumption here. 3/32 inch tall dimensions. Of course, we can still change that. You know, we can make it linear 1/8 inch aerial. So we could actually, if I'm wrong and 1/8 inch is the standard, I haven't deleted it yet. So we can just perform a very quick swap of all of those linear dimensions, and they just became 1/32 of an inch taller with their text piece. Sorry, it was 521 of them. All right, text styles are notoriously hard to get rid of because they can have an instance of them occur in some really random places. Dimensions, you kind of feel like you know where they're going to be. And so if you have already, you know, sort of raked through your drafting views and your legends and your floor plans, you know, just kind of standard views, then sometimes you can track those down manually, which is the really the only way to do it if you don't have a third-party tool like this. But text, man, it can be hidden away. You know, earlier I mentioned that sometimes you can't get rid of a text style because you imported a schedule from some neat job and it happened to specify a different body text style. that that's just wrong, but only one use of it, and now we can't purge it out. This is going to see all of them. You've got the ability to delete your 0 uses. You've got the ability to take some of these high count ones that maybe aren't standard, like this is 3/32 inch, and to force that to be 1/8 inch. Actually, it needs to be aerial narrow. So many to choose from here. Oh, standard text. That's the parentheses I'm looking for. Of course, you know which one to use. They put standard text as a suffix. I've seen that quite a lot. Or they put the firm's name or abbreviation as the prefix. And then that's really bad whenever that becomes 5 years old and you've got an old style that's pretending like it's the standard, but it's not. So, be careful whenever you're trying to designate standard in very obvious ways. The best way to do is to delete out the ones that you don't want people choosing from rather than trying to prefix it. All right, so here again, we can mark the ones that should be the standards, and normally that's going to be the ones at the top of the count. And then you've got the ability to sort of pick through these few instances and choose the thing to swap them to, and then hit swap. And then after that, you've got the ability. Oh, I was scrolling my mouse wheel while I had that selected. After that, you've got the ability to delete these. I know that I'd try to grab all of them and ran into a problem. Normally, I'm going to do them one at a time and just be careful because, like, the main point of doing this is to be a little bit meticulous. All right, under line styles, I wish I could tell you that we could take these ones in arrow brackets and we could very easily kind of change those out to be a different style. But we can't do that. What we can do is if users aren't supposed to use these, if they're supposed to use a different hidden line, like O3 hidden, then we can swap them. So we can take this, change it to O3 hidden, like that. And in just a minute, we'll swap that out once we, don't, be careful using your mouse wheel as you're going through these because it wants to run through the list here. So any of these with bracketed endpoints around them, these are system families for line styles that come with Revit. We can't delete them, but we can swap some of these that are in use to a more standardized one. I actually like the numbering scheme that they've used here. I've kind of been trying to settle this argument for years now as I do these template reviews and do template builds, because there's basically 4 different ways that you could choose to name your line styles. You can either do like this, where it's 1 through, let's say, 6 are your standard pins that you use. That's pretty simple. I'll use a O3 pin, and that's an O3 line type. But it doesn't really tell you, you just have to guess that the lower the number, the thinner it is, but you don't know how much thinner or thicker it is. The other way to do it is descriptive, which is what these out of the box Revit ones come with. And most people don't really like this because you've got medium, but it gets harder when you get to thinner lines. Like what would be the difference between thin and fine, or extra thin and extra fine? Like, I don't know. So then you've got to sort of try them out. So that's why most firms don't like that. Some firms will have their exact pin diameter written out. So it might say 0.003 inch. That'd be a real hairline. And that might actually be the name of the style, is the diameter size. And then some of them will be descriptive, or they'll be use case. So they'll just basically name it for, do this for elevation outlines. So elevation outline might be the name of the style. Here, they've kind of combined 2. They've got a number scheme, and then they've got a descriptor of relatively how heavy it is, and a differentiator between what's different about this one versus another. But yeah, there's definitely some cleanup that would need to occur underneath this. Most firms are not going to have, 80 line styles. They're going to have more like 15. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm not going to sit here and kind of meticulously change it. There's a lot that's similar between this screen and your previous screens. And it's actually a very similar workflow. But if you remember the line styles, you don't have access to purge unused underneath the purge unused screen. You can delete them. If we kind of go the other place to do this under manage, and then we go to our line styles, we can select some of these and delete them. Here's the problem. Is that in use? Man, who knows? And if I hit delete, those lines are going to cease to exist. And that's probably bad, right? That is definitely bad. So deleting them, this is a terrible way to go to try to use out of the box Revit to try to resolve that one. All right, let's jump back in one last minute, see if there's some other things to take a look at. So line styles is where we were. This is where the bulk of your work needs to concentrate on. What I would recommend too, you can do this to take a look at the general health of your template file first and foremost, and then also some of your projects. So if you're a project manager or a BIM manager or BIM coordinator, this is one of those tools that even if you're not intent upon, taking 15 minutes and fixing someone's project with all of these kind of rogue line styles and dimension and text, you can still learn some things about, and I'll tell you that it's incredibly personal to take a look at a firm's template and run this and see what they've got going on as far as line styles and such, because it can start to have it to where you're like reading some of their mail about what's going on in that firm, that they've got these competing standards, and like, now I know what the competing standards are. But we want to absolutely run this. And one of the things that as a BIM manager that I'm going to keep an eye out for is if I ever see any line styles that indicate that they came from AutoCAD. So if it looks like an AutoCAD layer, then a warning bell in me is going to go off and say, uh-oh, somebody exploded a CAD file in this project. Now, if you ever see that inside of a template, that is really bad. And I'm sure you know this, but that's actually start your template over bad. Because if you have inside of your template, someone exploded a CAD file, and it's extremely common. I would say 2/3 of the templates that I review have had that happen. And it was a previous employee. It was, 7 years ago, and that person's moved on, but we've just kind of been bringing this template along year after year. It tends to happen because you've got anywhere from 20 to 200 details that you're bringing over from AutoCAD. And, a lot of firms will kind of turn that over to a summer intern to do. And that person's like, well, the easiest way to do this is to bring the CAD file over into my Revit template here, and then we'll just explode this guy, right? And let's fix some of the line types. And so they end up getting rid of or changing out a lot of the line types, but you end up with new line types for every layer that existed. And it's really going to be bad if they exploded a site plan or something like that, because there's going to be 255 new line styles created from that mistake. So the reason that it's really bad to do that in a template is because it starts to shorten the time that you have before your project becomes corrupt. When you explode CAD files into a Revit project, you can clean a lot of this up with Type Swapper. In fact, you have to use third-party software to begin to clean that mess up. There's still metadata, there's still fragments of stuff that are in, if you explode a hatch, that kind of thing, there might be bajillions of little pieces inside of your drafting view. That's still there. And so some of it is incredibly difficult to clean up. And so if you see any warning signs of that while looking through Type Selector, that you've got some CAD remnants that came over, then that helps you make the case that, look, we need to set aside this many hours at this time when things settle down a little bit to phase in the complete replacement of our template. Another thing I'm going to use as a BIM manager to follow up on people is to open up their project and find out if they've created new line types. And that way I'll know if I have a Revit terrorist on my hands here. It's just kind of, you've got standards, but I'm just going to do what I want. I'm going to start to see those appear, and I'm going to kind of pattern that out and see if we have a problem, or if just some of these came from random previous project details that were brought in. So aside from just cleaning up your projects, you can use this to start really getting your arms around what the model hygiene is of the project you're taking a look at as well. You can also use this to change out line patterns. Normally, people tend to not have enough line patterns, so I don't really, normally I wouldn't utilize this tool for, trying to help purge out more things, but you can enforce standards. So if you've got different types of hidden lines or center lines of different dash length, you can change them to kind of create a little bit of standardization there. With fill patterns, sometimes you end up with AutoCAD fill patterns. You guys have seen this. Something.dwg is the name of the fill pattern style. Again, clear indication that someone exploded something from AutoCAD and did a terrible job, and they did that directly in the project, which is a big no-no. You'd be able to see that in your naming convention, and you can swap that out to a different style. What I like about this is it enumerates both places that we are using fill patterns, and it lets you know, roughly where this thing is, whether or not it actually has a material that is leveraging that fill pattern, or if you've got a filled region. And I believe you can have too many of any of these numbers. So if you start seeing one fill pattern that's in use in lots of different materials, that could indicate an issue, but not as big of an issue as if you start seeing really big numbers of filled regions. There's a lot of firms that are cutting that corner, and they have users that instead of creating detailed components, they're saying, this would be faster if I just did it as a filled region. I know how to do that. And then they create a dumb object. And that's particularly bad if a firm has transitioned to doing keynoting. Now, I don't just mean pointing to something and saying what it is. I mean using the keynote feature or tool inside of Revit, because the keynote needs to address a particular value. So that actually creates a parameter value that is baked into the object. And filled regions cannot accept parameter values. So you can't really you can keynote them, but you have to user keynote them. And there's a lot of firms that are trying to keynote, but 80% of their keynotes are user keynotes, which just kind of indicates that they're not keynoting correctly normally. I don't mean to rock your boat, but if I start seeing a lot of filled regions in this column, that's going to concern me. If I start to figure out, what's a normal amount that I'm used to seeing in the projects, and then it's at a higher rate whenever I look in this person's project, I'm probably going to start talking to them about, how can I show you better how to create detailed components so that we can build in some reusable intelligence in our details and in our model going forward. So we've got the ability to swap these out just like the others and delete them. And that's how I would use this tab for kind of as a BIM manager, kind of rating our health of the model. Materials, I'll be honest with you, this has not always been working for me, and I've kind of sought some help with this. I thought maybe I'm just not smart enough to use it, but I tend to get an error that it's unable to find the material. So I don't know that I could recommend using this tab yet. It looks like kind of something that they're still hammering out. There's nothing here that indicates whether it's in use or how many of those there are. So maybe stay tuned on materials, and this one will become a little bit more powerful. For right now, if you're wanting to clean up your materials, I would probably do that inside of the material browser to be able to delete them. And while I'm at that, while I'm apologizing for the tool maybe not always working, let me show you one last thing with materials, just out of the box Revit materials. Anytime that you select a material here, and under the appearance tab, of course, the one I would select doesn't have a number there, but be on the lookout for this. If you see a hand and it indicates a number other than 0, that means that this material asset is in use by another material. And almost always that happens because some novice created or duplicated rather a material from it. So they wanted it to behave like that. And that's fine if you want to duplicate a material. But if you duplicate, I would always click this button here, which is going to create a duplicate of that asset. And the reason you want to do that is because if I changed one of these, it would actually affect all of them. So if I, tint isn't an option on this particular kind of material, but if I change some of these settings, it would actually change both of them. I'm sure some of you guys have run into something like that. If you created one brick material and you duplicate it for the 4 different types of brick, and then you change one of them and it changes all of them, that's what's going on. You just need to duplicate that asset. So if you needed to rename them, I would do that from within here for now until that tool can do that. If you need to delete it, you can do that here. That is going to strip it out of your project. And so there's a very good chance something that was pointing to that. The reason it's here is because a family or something was already using that material, and it just sort of rode into our project as we loaded that family. So if you look around and you see a family, let's say an Inkscape, you're rendering it, and that family is showing as gleaming white, then you have deleted a material that was in use for that. All right, let me bring up TypeSwapper one last time, and I'm going to check my questions here in just a minute. And if you guys have some other workflows that you've been running through with trying to get rid of text types, line styles, line patterns, if you're doing out of the box Revit, if you've got any grief that you've had, there's a lot of firms that have been trying to get rid of 1 or 2 line styles for like 5 years. They just can't figure out where they are. So they just keep bringing them along for the ride. But that's sort of all of the different tabs and functionality that you're able to use within TypeSwapper. If you want to learn how to use it even more, you can click on this videos button. That will take you to CTC's webinar videos on this. And then you've got some other options for reporting things that don't work. If materials doesn't work for you, you can create a support case if it's kind of setting you back on your deadline. If it's just something quirky that's not really working right, you might choose report bug instead. Or if you want it to do something else, you could request feature. All right, let me check and see what we have in our comments. I'm also going to swap back over. All right. Kathleen says, is there an easy way to go to where the errant types are used to visually see if they should be swapped or deleted? There isn't, Kathleen. And even TypeSwapper is not going to help you get there. One of the great things about TypeSwapper is that it's able to enumerate how many of those exist. So at least we've got that going for us. And in a lot of cases, I guess as a BIM manager, if something is non-standard, I'm not really interested in hunting it down and seeing where it was used either. I just know it's not standard. So I'm going to force that change. So sorry, Kathleen, there's isn't, unless you were able to somehow figure out what the element ID would be. And we don't have that information. So, but if you did have it, then you could, anytime that something fails an audit or something like that, that's normally the only time people are leveraging element IDs. But if you ever have an element ID that you want to look up, sorry, I'm hovering over the wrong things here, then you can choose select by ID and type that information in and choose show, and Revit could take you there at that point. Jose says, does CTC has or is working on tools to clean up CAD imports and a tool to monitor the model for errors? Let's see. TypeSwapper does quite a bit for cleaning up CAD imports, Jose. So 2 months ago, I did quite a long job. Over 6 months, I took like 200 something CAD details for a firm and very cleanly converted them over to Revit assets. And so what you never want to do is actually do that in a project that you care about. Definitely not in your template. And so I would create a project called Explosion Zone. And then I knew exactly what was happening in that file. And then I would bring in a CAD import in a CAD file, explode it. And then I would set up drafting views for each one. And then after I bring over 10 or 20 of them, then you can jump over to something like TypeSwapper while you've got it open. I know this is an explosion zone, but it's the same idea here. But I would find those, I'd look at the numbering of it. I would find the CAD line types that were incorrect, and then I would swap them over to the correct Revit types that it needed to be. And so that does very much automate that process. So I would say that TypeSwapper is going to be a great go-to for even doing that. Second part of the question was a tool to monitor the model for errors. I mean, there's a few that kind of touch on model errors, but I'll be honest with you. Most of what I'm doing, so there's kind of two ways to deal with errors in a model. One is to audit the file, which pretty much most everybody knows about. If you go to File, Open, then underneath your project folder, you're going to have the capability to check audit. And that's going to take about 2.5 minutes to audit your project. It's pretty rare that things fail audits, but when they do, it tends to be a gloriously long list. And so normally you're just going to be deleting things. A lot of cases, that's users got a bunch of content from Revit City, or just, things are broken in that way. Proactively, what you want to do, and as a PM, something that I do as a higher level of, checking your model for errors, is to review your warnings. And this normally is a long list here. This is a great project when you have only got one warning here. And with this one, you actually can choose show. Well, it's supposed to have it highlighted, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, here it is. So you can have it show where that warning is, and then you can come in and fix the error that's wrong with it. So as a PM, you're probably never going to get rid of all of your warnings, but I do try to reduce these. And if you're a BIM manager, I would start to develop guidelines for your PMs to require them to clear out a number of warnings that are kind of numbskull warnings, that, like when you've got two rooms flooded together, that kind of thing, that they need to have that on their plate to do, so that you're solving bigger problems, whenever you're double checking their warnings. And then some of the high functioning firms that I take a look at their template on their splash screen, they actually will have a date of when their last warning, review, and audit were performed. And so as a BIM manager, I can jump in, check and see that they did. And that way I can compare that against what I might find and see if they're just not catching things, or I can know that they've just met that requirement and are good to go for, for another month or two. And then it'll have the date for when they're supposed to do that again. All right. So Jose says, our firm has a workflow for converting or adding CAD details as drafting views in Revit. Okay. The issue that we have is that some users still import CAD details to the project. No. And now we need to clean up the model. Yeah. So that's really dangerous. And Jose, the only way around that is to, you just have to train them, and you've got to kind of catch them so that you can kind of see, like, you're going to figure out who it is if you're kind of if you're opening up the projects and then you're going into, insert, manage links, and you're finding out who is importing thing. Well, actually, I'll just tell you what is linked inside, won't it? If you're finding them underneath your drafting views and you can click on them and they are selectable objects that aren't linked, then you figure out which projects have that occurring, and then you pattern out who's on those projects. And then you just have a very focused private training session with them about, look, I've been noticing that you keep importing in CAD files. And so I want to make sure that you understand that there's only one workflow where we ever do that. And that's actually the one I just explained to you guys about explosion zone, that you only ever do that when you're converting a CAD asset to a Revit asset, and you do that in an outside or a proxy project. That is literally the only reason to ever import CAD. Now, I'm open to other suggestions if you've got other good uses for import CAD, but in every other scenario, you need to be linking your CAD, which is what Jose is getting at. So unfortunately, that problem, you just got to train your team, and it helps to figure out who's the problem, so you're not making everybody sit through the training. And another thing that I see too that BIM managers are able to do to address that is they put it on the splash screen. And I know a lot of people don't tune into the splash screen, but that's normally because there's too much information there. And so you want to cull that down to, here are the 4 problems that we keep seeing in Revit. Now, there might be 20 things we want to tell you how to do so that you do it our company way, but we're going to put those in a BIM standards document instead. And here on the splash screen, what I'm telling you is I don't want to call your name out specifically, but you guys are not doing this. So make sure you're doing this. Make sure you're doing this with work sets. Make sure you're not importing in your CAD files, and you leave it on there until that's addressed that way, or you can kind of find someone who's doing it and then have that training with them. Normally, you know who it is anyways. You don't even have to follow up. You're just like, I know it's them. All right. Let me swap back over. All right, I'm going to keep an eye on our Q&A here too. So now you guys know how to access Type Swapper. You know a little bit about its interface. You also know about what you can do with out of the box Revit. I'm trying not to make this just 100% about the tool itself and showing you every button you can click on it. I'm trying to show you the workflow and what tends to be, I guess, the problem, the cleanliness problem. We've also explored problem scenarios. I've given you guys a lot of instances that I've had to deal with cleaning up different lines, dimension styles, etc. And then we also repaired a model. I didn't go through and repair every line item. You guys would log off if I did that. But some of the work that we as BIM managers do is not glorious. It's just there's just plenty of it. It's just being meticulous. Oh, and the free trial. So here's the address to that. It's 14-day free trial. You can use Type Swapper. You can use that to clean up you can use it to investigate your template. And I would, if I was starting work at your firm, if they hired me to be a BIM manager, I would probably use something like Type Swapper to open up your template, quantify some things, and look and see what's in use and which things aren't in use that maybe should go away. I'm going to use Type Swapper to very meticulously clean and swap those, and then purge and delete things that aren't needed. And then after that 14-day trial, I'm going to have tried, there's 11 tools in that BIM project suite. I'm going to try all of them and kind of see what the advantage to me as a BIM manager is. Those blue tools aren't intended for all of your users. So if you look up the cost of that, don't think that you'll need to buy that for everybody. You don't want every user to have access to those tools. It would be like arming them with assault weapons. You don't want everybody having those. That's really, normally it's just for one seat, but sometimes you've got, several BIM coordinators or people that are sort of high functioning Revit problem solvers or Revit Jedi that you would sort of allow to use a powerful set of tools like that. If you go to atgusa.com, that's who I work for. We've got a link for you guys to be able to download those. Somehow I erased. Well, you'll go there. You'll see it. And you can get Type Swapper in the hands of your users who need that. I had another question come in that was asking about splash screen. So, and it's by anonymous, but normally a splash screen is, I would say it's in use by about 3/4 of firms. About 1/4 of firms, they just launch you to a 3D view or to your floor plan. But 3/4 of firms are going to launch you to a sheet. And on that sheet are several pieces of parameter data to tell you things about the project. It's there to say basic things like, this project is in design development and we have 50% DD. That's our current phase, and it is due on August 20th. And so you relay basic team information on a splash screen, but then you also are going to normally relate project health related things. It's almost like a fire extinguisher. When was it last serviced? What is its current, is it full or does it need charge? You would do some model health checks on there too, with the dates of when a process was performed. If you don't have processes for doing warning checks and audits, that's something you ought to work on even before you get Type Swapper. And then also one of the things that you see on the splash screen is kind of quirky things that your firm does with Revit that you want to make sure that new people are aware of, but then also things that are problematic, that as a BIM manager, you keep seeing people are doing things the wrong way. You want to have a short list of about 4 things you need your team to work on, and just kind of swap those out as they start correcting those problems or having different kinds of problems. So that's what I meant by a splash screen inside of Revit. It's just a sheet that sits over in the project browser, and then someone goes to manage and they can choose the startup view. Sorry, some of my buttons are little. So yeah, look at that. I lucked out. It's this little button here, starting view. And then you can define the splash screen that you want to start up on at the start of each project. Great. I appreciate all of the questions here. And so I'll just pause for just another few seconds here. I want to thank you guys for showing up and being here too. This concludes our webinar on replace rogue Revit lines, text, and dimensions. And old switcheroo. I hope that this demonstration has motivated you guys to download a free trial of BIM Manager Suite. There are 11 tools, including Type Swapper, that are in that suite, and every one of those is designed to save you time, money, and maybe the biggest thing for a BIM manager is frustration. But certainly you want to not be solving high-level problems that are very meticulous and take a long amount of time to do manually. And so this is going to help you to be able to manage your team members' projects to meet their deadlines better. I'm James Hughes. Remember, and particularly for you, Jose, if one of your coworkers ever explodes a CAD file in their project, punch them in the throat and then use Type Swapper to clean up most of the mess. Until next time, goodbye.